So the Brazilian stock market is up almost 70% since the beginning of 2025, and many investors are asking themselves whether they should go long at the current levels or not. After all, it is true that Brazil has a lot of potential, that a lot of Brazilian stocks are still very cheap, and come on, everybody's talking about emerging markets, right? So in other words, Brazil is hot again. On the other hand, as everybody knows, Brazil seems to be facing some quite serious institutional problems. In fact, for many people, Brazil can hardly still be considered a democracy. So the question is, should we invest in Brazilian stocks or not? I mean, some of them might still be cheap, but they are cheap for a reason, right? In any case, in this video, I will share with you one Brazilian stock I'm seriously considering buying. No one is talking about the stock, it is a forgotten name, but it is also a very cheap one. And when I say this stock is cheap, I mean it. Just for you guys to have an idea of what I'm talking about, buying this company now is like buying a car for 10 grand and finding out there's 11 in the glove compartment. It is something like that. Now, I don't know about you, but I would be very happy to make that deal, to buy that car. In any case, that's the stock we'll discuss today. Now, before we begin, as always, nothing in this video is investment advice, okay? And with that said, let's get started. So, let's not lose time here and let's already review this company's name, okay? So today's stock is called Enjoei, listed on the Brazilian Stock Exchange, ticker ENJO3. Now, do you know what Enjoei means? If I say enjoei in Portuguese, it means I got tired of something. And that's this company's name because it is actually a marketplace of second-hand things, of second-hand items. Items people got tired of and decided to sell. So that's basically what this company does. It operates as a marketplace of second-hand stuff. And I like this business because first, it is very asset light. After the platform is done, you don't need to reinvest much, right? It is very scalable. However, on the other hand, it also doesn't have a strong moat, a strong competitive advantage. I mean, there are many marketplaces out there, right? Such as Amazon, Mercado Livre, which, by the way, are obviously competitors. But as we can see here, if on one hand, the Brazilian market has skyrocketed, the same has still not happened to Enjoei yet. As I said, this is a forgotten stock. However, that's what I expect is going to happen here. I believe some of the foreign capital that is flowing into Brazil, which is driving the stock market higher, but I believe some of this foreign capital flow will eventually make its way into these more overlooked Brazilian retail names, like Enjoei, and that at some point, this will end up helping to lift the stock. So I think this is going to be a very strong driver for Enjoei, especially if the Brazilian macro environment improves with the change in government and economic policy. However, on top of that, the company is also improving its fundamentals. That's also very important to note. Now, before I share with you why I believe Enjoei could go 100%, 200% up, let's first take a brief look at this company's numbers, okay? That's boring, I know, but if you want to invest in stocks, well, you can't run away from numbers, right? In any case, let's go through Enjoei's numbers as fast as we can so no one falls asleep. So first, as we can see here, if on one hand Enjoei's market cap stands at 205 million reais, which is equivalent to around $40 million, on the other, the company has about 210 million in net cash on its balance sheet. So that's why I said buying this company is like buying a car for 10 grand and finding out there's 11 inside. Because it would cost you 205 million reais to buy yourself the whole company. However, once it belonged to you, you would open its bank account and see 210 million in cash just sitting there. In other words, that's crazy, but it's true. But in other words, in a certain way, you were actually being paid to buy this company. Think about that. So yeah, Enjoei certainly seems very cheap. Anyway, moving on, while Enjoei is trading at a negative enterprise value, it is actually showing pretty fine numbers. For instance, Enjoei has a 56% gross margin, which, as we can see here, has been improving a lot over the past few years, going from just 26% to the current levels. So, we can already see the company is delivering, right? That's already a good sign. Besides, though it's true the company is operating at a loss on an annual basis, As we can see here, their net losses have been drastically reduced, which again shows strong execution. And by the way, on a quarterly basis, the company is almost breaking even, okay? So don't be surprised if Enjoei starts posting net profits, positive numbers. Moving on, the company has been burning cash over the last few years. I know that's evident, right? However, the game is changing, and in the last quarters, Enjoei has been finally generating free cash flow. Actually, in the last 9 months alone, Enjoei delivered 14 million reais in free cash flow. Now, think about that. Enjoei posted 14 million reais in free cash flow over the last 9 months, and their enterprise value stands at negative 5 million. So you are basically being paid to buy this company, Enjoei, while at the same time, it is already generating free cash flow. So think about that. And as you've seen, this company is actually far from terrible, right? I mean, its numbers are actually fine. It is true they don't have a good track record. After all, they've been losing money, right, over the past few years. However, we need to understand that this company was being built this whole time. It takes time to build things, right? But from what it seems, Enjoei has never been in better shape. So, in summary, while the market is ignoring the stock, Enjoei has turned the game around and is finally generating cash. So that's why I'm seriously considering buying Enjoei. In fact, I'm already long, but my position is still small. So my idea is to actually buy more shares, adding to my existing position. In any case, with that said, I think this is a pretty cheap stock. And if the Brazilian macro environment changes, this name could be a huge winner. Now, okay, we've already understood this company is basically being given away for free. I think that's clear for everybody. However, why is Enjoei trading at such a ridiculous valuation? Because you see, the investment environment in Brazil has simply been terrible over the past 4 years. Lula's government has been operating in a very Keynesian way, if you know what I mean. But in case you don't know Lula, he's the president of Brazil, and well, he's basically a socialist. And his idea is to boost the economy using the state as the main driver. However, there are some problems with that, right? Because if the state becomes the main economic actor, that means it will probably need to spend just a little more, right? Just a little more. And well, Lula is spending a little more. Actually, Lula is spending like there's no tomorrow. As we can see here, Brazil's deficit came back to pandemic levels, even though there's no pandemic anymore. You need talent to do this. But as I was saying, if the state becomes the main economic actor, that's what happens. Bigger deficits, which in turn means more taxes. And here let me note that the current Brazilian government has increased taxes 27 times in 3 years. Let me repeat that. 27 times in 3 years. So yeah, deficits are a real and big problem. And as I was saying, they represent more taxes and also more debt, which in case of Brazil has also been going up. So in summary, that's what Brazilians have been going through over the past 4 years. That's what's been happening. More deficit, more taxes, and debt. And as a consequence, in order to compensate for the higher risk, interest rates have skyrocketed and now stand at 15%, which is obviously a huge problem, right? Especially for the retail sector, which is extremely dependent on credit. Besides, high interest rates are also a problem because they also drain the stock market. Let's recall that. So it's no surprise Enjoei is trading at a negative enterprise value. After all, why take on risk, especially buying a company that's losing money, when you can get 15% per year in treasuries, right? There's just no reason for you to take on risk. But you see, high interest rates are not the only problem Brazil's economy is facing. No, Brazilians like to play on impossible mode. If interest rates were high, but inflation was at least under control, then things wouldn't be so hard today. However, that's not what's happening. The truth is that even though the official inflation rate stands at only 4%, which is kind of low if you think about it, the truth is that prices in real life have gone up much more than that. Much more than that. So in summary, if on one hand, Brazilians are facing very high interest rates. On the other, their pockets are also empty due to inflation. And well, of course, that's the perfect storm for retail, right? So in my opinion, the macro scenario, this Brazilian stagflation, is the main reason why Enjoei is trading at such a low valuation. After all, as we've seen, the company is improving, right? In fact, here's something very important to note. Enjoei is improving its numbers even in this shitty environment, okay? Let's not forget that. That also shows strong execution. Many companies in Brazil are going bankrupt today, but Enjoei is not one of them, and that certainly counts a lot. But okay, with all that said, taking all those things into consideration, how do I think about buying Enjoei? Well, for me, if I really decide to add to my position, I will be buying a company basically for nothing, right? Yes, it is true that the company's numbers could deteriorate. However, I think we've already seen the worst. In fact, I believe the opposite will happen. I think the company will continue to improve, delivering increasingly better numbers. So just for that reason, I think Enjoei already deserves higher multiples. I mean, would Enjoei be expensive at 0.5 times enterprise value to sales? Well, I don't think so. Meanwhile, let's recall, this company is trading at a negative enterprise value. Now, another important topic regarding the macro environment risk. Well, it is true the macro environment in Brazil could keep getting worse, inflation could continue going up, interest rates too, and of course that will likely be very negative for Enjoei. Yes, that could indeed happen. But it's precisely because this risk exists that I will be going long with a limited position, controlling my risk, right? In the end, Enjoei will be a small position, accounting maybe for only 1% of my family's portfolio, which is where the stock is probably going to enter. But this way, if the Brazilian environment continues to get worse, my risk will be under control. With that said, everything has a price. And even considering a bad macro scenario, I still believe Enjoei is trading at an utterly pessimistic valuation. On the other hand, what if the Brazilian scenario improves a little? I think we also need to consider that. That could also happen, right? But what if Lula loses the elections and a more competent government takes office? I mean, Enjoei is trading at such a pessimistic valuation that any improvement in expectations could send the stock soaring. So that's how I think about buying the stock. I think it is a very asymmetric play. And honestly, I'm really feeling compelled to go long. Now, let's talk about upside. After all, where could the stock go, right? Assuming things will improve. Well, could Enjoei trade at, for instance, 2 times enterprise value to sales? Well, I certainly believe it could. Now, according to my calculations, in that case, Enjoei's stock would need to go to around 3.64 reais, which would imply a total return of 264%. However, Enjoei could also trade at 5 times enterprise value to sales, right? I don't think that would be impossible at all, but you could do the math using that number too. My point is, I think Enjoei has a lot of upside. I think it is a very asymmetric play. In any case, that's how I think about Enjoei, the Brazilian stock I might buy next. That's it for today, and see you next time.